They lit up our living rooms, then disappeared without a word. 20 beloved shows erased from the heart of American family nights like they were never there at all. What happened to the stories we once shared in silence side by side? How did they vanish before we even noticed they were gone? This show was the quiet heartbeat of many family evenings. The kind of series you watched with your parents while the dog curled up nearby and the world outside felt just a little less loud. Family Affair told the story of a wealthy bachelor, Bill Davis, who suddenly finds himself the guardian of 3 orphan children. But it was not just the storyline that pulled people in. It was the warm presence of Mr. French, the British butler, whose old world manners clashed with a new world household. Their dynamic was soft, graceful chaos, balancing the responsibility of raising children with the struggle to keep something as fragile as a family from falling apart. What made Family Affair hit so deeply was not drama. It was stillness. It was the quiet moments of Uncle Bill staring at the window after a long day, realizing his life was no longer his own. It was Buffy, clutching her beloved Mrs. Beasley doll like it was her only anchor. These were not just actors and characters. These were people we saw ourselves in. Then, slowly, they disappeared. Not canceled in scandal or drama, but phased out quietly, like a memory no one wanted to admit they had forgotten. Today, Family Affair is a ghost on television's timeline, almost too polite to fight for its place. But if you ever caught an episode, you knew it was never about the plot. It was about how it felt to be seen. There was something strange and beautiful about this show, like a bedtime story wrapped in a sitcom. Nanny and the Professor was about a mysterious English nanny named Phoebe Figalili, who arrived out of nowhere to care for the chaotic household of Professor Everett and his 3 kids. She had an air of magic about her, never overt, never explained, but always understood. This was not a flashy show. There were no laugh tracks forcing you to find it funny, no obvious special effects screaming for attention. Instead, it asked you to believe, to trust that sometimes the people who save us do not come with explanations. They just show up, quietly, like Nanny did, and make life a little better without asking for anything in return. There were whispers that she was psychic. Some thought she was a witch, but it never mattered. What mattered was that she taught 3 kids and a tired, widowed professor how to feel joy again. And for a brief moment in television history, that kind of emotional rescue was enough. When the show ended after just 2 seasons, it left behind a strange sense of unresolved wonder. We never found out who Nanny really was. Maybe that was the point. Some people are not meant to stay. They just pass through when you need them most. Like a childhood memory you can almost remember, but not quite. Before nostalgia became an aesthetic, Margie brought it to life with pink wallpaper and cloche hats. Set in the roaring 20s but aired in the early 1960s, this sitcom was a charming, retro escape into a world that felt dreamlike, even to its original audience. Margie Clayton was the all-American girl, witty and wide-eyed, caught between homework and heartbreak. She lived in a time of flappers and prohibition, but her struggles felt familiar. Parents who didn't understand, boys who did not listen, friends who came and went. Every episode was like opening an old photo album, sepia-toned, soft around the edges, and a little too perfect to be real. That was the magic. The show was more than just a period piece. It was a bridge between generations. Adults saw their youth in it. Kids saw a version of growing up that felt both exciting and safe. But it did not last. 1 year. That was all Margie got. The network said the ratings were weak, but the truth is, Margie's quiet storytelling could not compete with louder, faster shows. And so it vanished, tucked into the drawer of television history like a love letter no one had the heart to throw away. Today, barely anyone remembers Margie. But if you do, you probably remember how she made you feel, like being young was something you never wanted to let go of. Few shows dared to be as gentle and raw as the Waltons. In a television landscape growing louder and flashier, this quiet drama about a rural Virginia family during the Great Depression and World War II was an act of rebellion. It reminded us that the world did not need to be big to feel important. Watching the Waltons felt like returning to a house you never lived in but still knew by heart. The opening narration was a hug. The goodnight scenes at the end of each episode were a lullaby. The series followed the tight-knit Walton family, 7 children, 2 parents, 2 grandparents, and turned their small victories and heartaches into epic truths. When John Boy chased his dream of becoming a writer, when Mary Ellen faced life after loss, when the family sat around a dinner table with barely enough food but more than enough love, it was more than a story. It was a reflection. Somehow, a show about a family from another era became the emotional backbone of real families watching together in the 70s. But time is cruel. As new decades arrived, the Waltons faded. The world moved faster, and it stopped looking back. Now it exists mostly in boxed DVD sets and the whispered memories of people who remember what real family television used to feel like. They do not make shows like this anymore, because maybe they think we no longer need them. But the truth is, we do. Maybe now more than ever. This one did not need a script. An American Family was the first of its kind, a raw, unscripted look into the real life of a real family, the Louds. And America was not ready. When it aired in 1973, it shattered every idea we had about what family television meant. This was not fiction. This was not safe. The Loud family fought, cried, broke down on camera. We watched a marriage fall apart. We saw a son come out as gay on national television at a time when even saying the word was taboo. Viewers were shocked, some were angry, others felt seen for the first time. The Louds were not perfect, and that was the point. This was a mirror held up to the nation, and not everyone liked what they saw. The show only aired once, in a 13-part documentary format, but its ripples never stopped. It inspired decades of reality television, but none captured the raw honesty of this one. An American Family vanished not because it failed, but because it told the truth. A truth that television, and maybe the country itself, was not yet ready to hear. Watching it now is like opening an old wound. You see how far we have come, but also how far we have not. The Louds were just a family, but they were also a revolution. It was one of those shows that should have faded into parody, but somehow carved out a place in America's living rooms, and never really left. The Beverly Hillbillies followed the Clampett family, simple folks from the Ozarks who struck oil and suddenly found themselves living in a Beverly Hills mansion they could not understand, surrounded by wealth they never asked for. The comedy was obvious, their backward ways clashing with the glittering absurdity of high society. But beneath the laughs was something quieter, something almost tragic. This was a story about people who never quite fit in, no matter how big their bank account got. Jed Clampett, the soft-spoken patriarch, always seemed like he was looking for something he had lost, even as the world laughed around him. Granny's wild wisdom and Ellie Mae's innocence made them caricatures on the surface, but real to anyone who knew what it meant to be treated like a joke just for being different. And America watched, week after week, because it reminded us that not every outsider is looking to blend in. But then, just like that, the Clampetts were gone. One day they were gracing prime time, the next they were a punchline, buried beneath newer shows with shinier backdrops and faster jokes. The laugh track stopped, and no one asked why. Today, the Beverly Hillbillies exists mostly in rerun limbo, a relic with a twang, treated like a fossil of a simpler time. But if you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching Granny try to make moonshine in a millionaire's kitchen, then you remember what television used to be. Odd, imperfect, human. And sometimes, that was exactly what made it so rich. There was something sacred about 227, like a front porch conversation on a warm night that you did not want to end. It was not flashy. It did not need a catchphrase or an outrageous setting to keep your attention. It just gave you people, real people, laughing, arguing, leaning on each other through life's ordinary storms. Centered around Mary Jenkins and her neighbors in a Washington, D.C. apartment building, 227 gave African-American family life the center stage it had long been denied. And it did it with humor, grace, and strength. Mary was sharp and fiercely loyal, with a side-eye that could shut down a room. Sandra Clark, her glamorous, sassy neighbor, lit up the screen in high heels and higher drama. But what made 227 matter was not just the characters, it was the culture it celebrated. Sunday dinners, hallway gossip, community struggles. It showed Black joy and Black resilience in a way that felt honest and rare. For many families, this was the first time they saw themselves on screen not as sidekicks or stereotypes, but as the stars. And yet, 227 quietly vanished. It ended not in scandal or protest, but in silence. The world moved on, and network television forgot the space it had once carved out. The stories stopped airing, but they never stopped mattering. Today, it is a name that gets a smile from those who remember, and a blank stare from those who do not. But for anyone who grew up with it, 227 was not just a sitcom. It was home. Some shows are just too weird and wonderful to survive. The Adventures of Brisco County Jr. was one of them. Imagine a show that mixed cowboy shootouts with futuristic science fiction, where a Harvard-educated bounty hunter rode horseback through the Wild West, chasing outlaws and ancient alien technology. It should not have worked, but somehow it did. Bruce Campbell's Brisco was charming, sharp, and oddly philosophical for a man in spurs. The tone was part Western, part comic book, and part pulp serial, and all heart. It winked at the camera, but never lost its soul. There were glowing orbs, steampunk gadgets, and a subplot about time-traveling artifacts that felt wildly out of place, and yet completely right. It was not just about justice, it was about belief. Belief in progress, in legacy, in the idea that even the Wild West had a future worth dreaming of. But television did not know what to do with it. The ratings were decent, the fan base was devoted, but it was too different, too out there. After one season, it was gone. One of the most original shows of the 1990s disappeared into the void while the world chose safer stories. Now, it lives on in whispers, on fan forums, in dusty DVD collections, in the memories of those who knew television had stumbled upon something special and let it slip away. Brisco County was ahead of its time. Maybe that was the problem. Or maybe the real adventure was just getting to see it at all. If you grew up in the 1990s, this show was like the cool older cousin who always knew what was up, but still made time to help you with your homework. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper followed Mark Cooper, a former professional basketball player turned high school teacher who used humor, honesty, and a whole lot of heart to guide kids through school and life. Played by Mark Curry, he was the kind of teacher everyone wished they had. He cracked jokes but never dodged the real stuff. He called it like he saw it. He cared. But the show was not just about Cooper. It was about a house filled with friends, family, and the messy love that holds them together. Vanessa, his confident and hilarious roommate, brought sass and style. Geneva and young Nicole added warmth and relatability. They all lived together, stumbled together, and picked each other up when the world got rough. It felt like family, even if it was not traditional. What made Mr. Cooper stand out was how seamlessly it blended life lessons with laughs. It dealt with serious issues, peer pressure, racism, disappointment, without ever getting preachy. And it never forgot to have fun along the way. For 5 solid years, it was a staple of the family night lineup. Then it was gone, quietly shuffled off the schedule, with little fanfare and less reason. The reruns dried up. The impact did not. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper was one of the last sitcoms that felt like it cared about kids and adults at the same time. And for many of us, that kind of care was rare. Sometimes a show does not just entertain, it teaches you how to believe in your own voice. Ghostwriter was like that. It was a mystery series for kids, but it hit deeper than most adult shows dared. Set in Brooklyn, the series followed a diverse group of young friends who solved real mysteries with the help of a ghost, one who could only communicate through written words. He was not scary. He was not loud. He was a presence, a guide, a friend. And through him, Ghostwriter taught an entire generation that reading and writing were not just school assignments, they were power. The characters, from Jamal to Lenny to Alex and Gabby, were smart and real. They dealt with school pressure, identity, and fear, and still found time to solve crimes in their spare time. The show respected its viewers. It never talked down to kids. It treated them as thinkers, as questioners, as collaborators in a world that often overlooked their voices, and that made it feel like magic. But for all its quality and meaning, Ghost Rider never got the love it deserved. Maybe it was too educational. Maybe it was too sincere. Whatever the reason, it vanished after 3 seasons, leaving behind a trail of haunted keyboards and half-remembered clues. Still, for those who watched, it lit something inside. A belief that your words mattered, that your questions were worth asking, and that maybe, just maybe, something unseen was always helping you figure it all out. Some shows did not just reflect youth. They shaped it. California Dreams was a sun-soaked, surfside time capsule of teenage life in the early 1990s. It followed a group of high school friends who formed a band, chasing stardom while juggling friendship, heartbreak, homework, and everything in between. The setting was always golden, the skies always blue, but the emotions hit deep. Every episode felt like a page out of a diary someone forgot to lock. Behind the catchy guitar riffs and pop lyrics, this was a show about change, about how friendships bend under pressure, how dreams evolve, and how growing up always means leaving something behind. The characters, from Jake's cool loner persona to Tiffany's grounded kindness, were more than tropes. They were reflections of us. They made mistakes, chased the wrong people, fought over the wrong things, and then picked up the pieces, sometimes with a song, sometimes with silence. California Dreams offered a vision of youth that was both dreamy and devastating. It made you want to learn guitar. It made you want to call your friends. It made you wonder if high school was really just a stage for a story you might not fully appreciate until it is over. The show ended after 4 years, not with a bang, but a quiet fade. It was gone before most people realized how much it mattered. Now it lives as a soft echo from the corner of nostalgia, waiting for someone to remember how it felt to watch young people sing their hearts out while the tide rolled in behind them. This show did not just imagine superpowers, it made you feel like they might happen to you next. The secret world of Alex Mack was every middle schooler's fantasy wrapped in a denim jacket and a bucket hat. When a normal girl named Alex is accidentally doused in a mysterious chemical, she gains powers. She can move things with her mind, shoot electricity from her fingers, and even melt into a puddle. But this was not some glossy superhero tale. Alex did not become famous or powerful. She became hunted, and afraid, and different. The show was about more than abilities. It was about the isolation of adolescence, about hiding who you are because the world is not ready, about balancing science homework with secret identities, friendship with fear. Alex was smart, brave, vulnerable, and deeply human. Her world was not filled with capes and explosions, but with skateboards, lockers, and the quiet terror of being discovered. There were corporations chasing her, best friends protecting her, and parents who had no idea what she was going through. That made it real. That made it hurt. The show resonated because it never glamorized its concept. It treated being special as a burden. And for kids feeling weird or out of place, that message was everything. When it ended after 4 seasons, it left behind more than a cliffhanger. It left behind a community of viewers who still wonder what happened to Alex and whether there is still magic hiding just beneath the surface of a normal life. This show was weird. Beautifully, unapologetically weird. The Adventures of Pete and Pete followed 2 red-headed brothers, both named Pete, through a suburban world that never quite behaved like it was supposed to. Their town had superheroes, personal nemeses, dancing tattooed moms, and ice cream men who waged psychological warfare. It was childhood stretched into surrealism. Every story felt like it came from a dream you almost forgot, but remembered just enough to know it meant something. There were bike rides that felt like quests, songs that seemed to change time, and friendships that dug deep into the soul. Little Pete was defiant and wild, a spark of rebellion. Big Pete was thoughtful and unsure, trying to figure out who he was becoming. Together, they made sense of a world that never did. The show never explained itself. That was its brilliance. It did not try to teach you a lesson, it just let you feel. Joy, confusion, sorrow, wonder. It trusted that you could handle that. And somehow, you always could. Pete and Pete vanished not because it failed, but because it did not fit the mold. Too poetic to be a kid's show, too silly to be called art. So it slipped between the cracks, like many beautiful things do. But if you ever saw an episode, really saw it, then you know it still lives somewhere deep inside your memory, right next to that weird summer day that felt like it meant more than it should have. Some shows lasted long enough to become legends. Salute Your Shorts only needed one season. Set in Camp Anawanna, this scrappy little series captured the chaos, laughter, and bittersweet awkwardness of summer camp better than anything before or since. It was loud, it was messy, it was perfect. Every episode was a snapshot of friendship forged in bug spray and bad cafeteria food. You had Donkey Lips, the lovable underdog; Budnick, the rule-breaking prankster with a hidden soft side; Z, Dina, Sponge. They were not polished or pretty. They were real. Kids who wore mismatched socks, fought over bunk beds, and stayed up too late daring each other to sneak into the woods. But what made Salute Your Shorts stick was its honesty. It understood that camp is more than canoe races and ghost stories. It is where kids first learn how to be away from home, how to find your place, how to fall in and out of crushes and feel like the world is ending over a lost flashlight. It was funny, yes, but also deeply nostalgic. Even as it aired, it felt like something already gone. Maybe that is why it ended so quickly. It burned too bright. Networks wanted polish. What they got was heart. Now it survives in memory, in campfire smoke and the sound of a distant whistle, in the way the theme song still gets stuck in your head out of nowhere. For those who remember, Salute Your Shorts was more than just a show. It was a summer that never really ended. There was something disarmingly genuine about brotherly love. Maybe it was because the three brothers on screen, Joey, Matthew, and Andrew Lawrence, were real brothers in real life. Or maybe it was because the show never tried too hard. It just let the relationships speak for themselves. Set in Philadelphia, the series followed Joe Roman, a motorcycle-riding older brother who returns home after their father's death to help raise his two younger half-brothers and manage the family business. It was not flashy. It was not trying to reinvent the sitcom. It was just about a broken family trying to make things work. And somehow, that made it feel like everything. Joe was rough around the edges but protective. Matt was the overachiever with a heart too big for his age. Andy was the comic relief and the emotional glue. Together, they rebuilt more than just a business. They rebuilt trust. They rebuilt a family. Brotherly love hit differently because it did not pretend everything was fine. It showed grief without drowning in it, laughter without ignoring the pain, and it gave kids and parents alike a rare glimpse into what it means to show up for people, even when it is messy, especially when it is messy. The show was short-lived, barely 2 seasons, but it carved out a quiet place in the hearts of anyone who ever lost something and had to figure out how to move forward, one day at a time. Not all love looks perfect. Sometimes it just looks like 3 brothers under one roof, doing the best they can. In a sea of over-the-top teen dramas and goofy comedies, the mystery files of Shelby Woo stood out by being both grounded and bold. Shelby Woo was not a pop star or a secret princess. She was just a smart, curious teenager with a badge-shaped dream and a knack for uncovering the truth. Set in a sleepy Florida town, the show followed Shelby as she interned at the local police department while juggling school, friendships, and all the usual teenage trials. But Shelby's world was not just locker notes and after-school crushes. It was suspects, clues, and dead ends. She was relentless, observant, brave, and most importantly, she listened. It was not just about solving mysteries. It was about learning who you are when no one else sees you clearly. Shelby's quiet tenacity made her a role model for kids who felt underestimated, unseen, or overlooked. Where other shows gave us caricatures of teens, Shelby Woo gave us someone who felt real. Not perfect, not invincible, just determined. The show had a quiet confidence to it. It did not rely on special effects or trendy lingo. It let the stories carry the weight. It gave kids the benefit of the doubt that they could handle mystery, complexity, and moral ambiguity, that maybe they wanted more than just punchlines. Shelby broke the mold not by being loud, but by being thoughtful. She was proof that curiosity could be cool, that asking questions could be power. The series slowly faded from the spotlight as flashier content took over, but it left behind something rare: a girl detective who did not need to be superhuman to be unforgettable. Some shows are ahead of their time, so much so that the world forgets them before it ever really saw them. Get Real was one of those shows. It was a single-season drama-comedy hybrid that pulled back the curtain on suburban life with startling honesty and heartache. It followed the Green family, imperfect, struggling, and achingly familiar. Parents trying to hold on to their marriage, teens trying to hold on to themselves. What made Get Real different was its courage to break the fourth wall. Characters would look straight into the camera and say the things we were too scared to admit, about fear, about love, about how hard it is just to be a person. Jesse Eisenberg played the awkward, sensitive son. Anne Hathaway, in one of her earliest roles, was the confident daughter cracking under quiet pressure. But it was not about star power. It was about emotional honesty. The show dared to be vulnerable at a time when television preferred gloss over grit. Every episode felt like opening a diary and reading what someone else was too afraid to say out loud. The kind that does not raise its voice to be heard. Each episode felt like a confession, a little too raw, a little too real. Maybe that is why it did not last. Viewers wanted resolution, but Get Real only offered reflection. And when it vanished, it left behind the kind of ache you feel when a good conversation ends too soon. Today, it is barely a footnote in TV history, but for those who watched, it was a whisper of truth in a world that usually just pretended. Before inclusion became a buzzword, Hang Time quietly lived it. This teen sitcom was centered on a high school basketball team, with one twist. One of the star players, Julie Connor, was a girl, and the series never treated that as a gimmick. It explored what it meant to break into a boy's world, not with magic or rebellion, but with sheer talent and quiet determination. Julie was strong, not because she was written to be, but because she had to be. The show did not just focus on the court, it dove into race, gender, friendship, and pressure. Real issues with no easy answers. It did so with warmth, humor, and sincerity, never talking down to its young audience. Coach Katowinski, the wise mentor figure, often acted as the voice of reason, but never the voice of perfection. Hang Time did not push boundaries, it lived within them, and still showed us how to stretch them from the inside. Its impact was subtle, but deeply felt by viewers who saw themselves in characters finally playing for more than just a win. The teens stumbled, they failed, they fought, and through it all, the team came first. The bond that formed on the hardwood felt genuine, earned, and familiar to anyone who ever played a sport or tried to find their place. Hang Time ran for 6 seasons, but somehow it still slipped through the cracks of nostalgia. Maybe because it never screamed for attention. It just showed up, week after week, doing what great shows do, telling stories that made people feel seen. It was never just about basketball. It was about believing that the game, like life, had room for everyone. There was no script, no set, no characters, just kids being kids. Bug Juice was one of the first reality series made for younger viewers, and it hit like a warm, unfiltered memory of summer that never fully leaves you. Set at real American summer camps, it followed groups of preteens and teens through weeks of friendship, homesickness, awkward crushes, personal growth, and emotional firsts. There were no plot twists, just real life, captured in all its messy honesty. You saw kids cry when they missed home. You saw them celebrate small victories. You saw them form bonds that felt bigger than the campgrounds they occupied. Bug Juice was not trying to entertain, it was trying to reflect. And in doing so, it did something more powerful. It made its audience feel less alone. It captured the exact moment when innocence starts to fracture, but wonder still holds on. There was beauty in the awkward silences, the shy glances, and the honest confessions of kids just beginning to understand themselves. For kids watching at home, these campers were mirrors. They were the same age. They had the same fears, the same jokes, the same hopes. The camera did not glamorize them, it simply followed them. That simplicity was its strength. It captured something so ephemeral, what it means to be on the edge of growing up, just for a moment. The show ended without ceremony, its cast scattered, its legacy quietly stored in the minds of a generation that still remembers how the campfire felt. In a media world obsessed with fiction, Bug Juice told a small, beautiful truth. Sometimes the most unforgettable stories are the real ones. This was the campfire that never needed matches. Are You Afraid of the Dark? Was more than just a kids' horror anthology. It was a rite of passage. A group of teens, calling themselves the Midnight Society, would gather in the woods to tell scary stories. But it was not the monsters that made it unforgettable. It was the mood, the hush that fell when someone tossed powder into the fire. The quiet intensity of those young faces as they leaned in. The way fear bonded them. Each episode was different. Ghosts, curses, supernatural oddities. Sometimes spooky, sometimes tragic, sometimes weirdly beautiful. But no matter the tale, there was always an emotional core. Loneliness, jealousy, guilt, love. The real ghosts hiding behind the fiction. The show gave kids permission to be afraid and taught them how to carry that fear with courage. Even in darkness, it said, we can find connection, empathy, and the power of shared stories. The show never pandered. It trusted its audience to handle fear and to learn from it. Kids tuned in not just to be scared, but to be part of something secret, something sacred. Watching it felt like sneaking into a world just for the brave. And then it was gone, slowly, quietly, replaced by brighter, safer content. But for those who remember, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Still flickers in the back of the mind like a campfire that refuses to go out. Because some stories do not end when the screen fades. They echo. Prophet was not just ahead of its time, it felt like it had fallen in from another dimension. Airing briefly in 1996, the show followed Jim Prophet, a cold, calculating corporate executive who manipulated everyone around him to rise through the ranks. He slept in a cardboard box, spoke directly to the camera, and treated his job like a game of psychological warfare. Audiences did not know what to make of it. This was the same decade that gave us Friends and Frasier, shows built on warmth, laughter, and ensemble charm. Prophet was the opposite. It was cold, cynical, and daring. Too daring. It was canceled after only a few episodes, with critics divided and networks scared. He was the snake in the boardroom, charismatic, empty-eyed, and terrifyingly believable. The show didn't just critique capitalism, it made you feel complicit in it. It asked the kind of questions no one wanted to answer, especially during prime time. But years later, something strange happened. Prophet developed a cult following. People began to see it as the prototype for the morally ambiguous anti-heroes who would define television in the 2000s. Characters like Tony Soprano, Don Draper, and Walter White. In hindsight, it was not just edgy for the sake of it. It was visionary. The show explored themes of corporate corruption, trauma, and identity with unsettling depth. And Adrian Pasdar's performance as Prophet remains chilling and magnetic. It was television holding up a mirror to ambition and daring us not to look away. But in 1996, America blinked, and the show was gone. Still, the mark it left has never fully faded. It had glitz, it had charm, and it had the Las Vegas Strip, but it never had the audience. Who's Watching the Kids was a sitcom that centered on two aspiring showgirls trying to make it big in Sin City while raising their younger siblings in the process. The idea alone seemed like a classic blend of heartfelt family drama and zany showbiz antics. It had neon, sequins, and sass, along with the tried-and-true formula of mismatched roommates balancing dreams and responsibility. But the series never found its footing. The humor felt thin. The stories leaned heavily on awkward misunderstandings and slapstick gags that even the laugh track could not salvage. The kids were mostly relegated to the background, and the adult characters lacked the warmth that audiences were used to from family-centric shows. NBC hoped it would capture the same lightning that made Laverne and Shirley a hit, especially since it came from the same producers. But it missed the heart, and it missed the timing. Audiences in the late 1970s were already shifting toward more grounded, character-driven sitcoms. The over-the-top Vegas flair and cartoonish setups just felt out of touch. Ratings declined quickly. After only 11 episodes, the show was quietly pulled. It has since faded into near-total obscurity. For a show that promised both showbiz sparkle and family tenderness, it managed to deliver neither. Watching it now feels like digging up a discarded script from a past that tried too hard to be funny without ever being real. A footnote in television history, barely remembered, but maybe, just maybe, that is for the best. Eric Persullivan was the kind of weird you wished you could be. As Dewey on Malcolm in the Middle, he stole every scene without ever trying. He was odd, unfiltered, a little too smart, and strangely wise beyond his years. You never quite knew what he would say next, and that was the charm. In a show packed with chaos and punchlines, Dewey was the quiet chaos, the unexpected storm. And then, just like that, Eric faded into the silence. When the series ended, so did his career. Not with a bang, but with an empty space where we thought he would be. There were no major interviews, no public breakdowns, just Eric, disappearing into the backdrop of real life. He made a couple of small appearances in the early 2000s, but nothing that felt like a return. And after a certain point, the world stopped asking when we would see him again. Because deep down, we knew the answer. Rumors have swirled, speculation has followed, but Eric has never stepped back into the spotlight to explain. And maybe he does not owe us that. Maybe his silence is its own kind of message, that life does not always need to be performed, that not every story gets a sequel. Sometimes the curtain falls and the actor just walks away. But there is something haunting about it, something unfinished. Because Dewey was not just a character. He was a mirror to the strange, fragile, brilliant side of being a kid. And the boy behind him? He chose something that most child stars never get: anonymity, peace, privacy, a life off stage. The Colgate Comedy Hour was not just another variety show, it was an event. Airing live from 1950 to 1955, it brought the electric chaos of the stage directly into the homes of millions. Hosted by a rotating cast of comedy legends like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Eddie Cantor, and Abbott and Costello, the show captured a kind of energy that no scripted sitcom ever could. It was unpredictable, unpolished, and wildly entertaining. Every week was a gamble, a new experiment in whether or not the comedians could top their last performance. And more often than not, they did. It was a golden age of television in the raw, where mistakes happened on air and the audience loved it more for that. You felt the tension in every live performance. Anything could go wrong, and sometimes it did. But that chaos made it human, alive, and impossible to turn away from. It was the only place where you could see slapstick, song, and celebrity all within the same breath. And at its best, it felt like the whole country was in on the joke at the same time. The competition with The Ed Sullivan Show was fierce, and at times it looked like Colgate might actually win. But time plays favorites, and while Ed Sullivan became immortal, Colgate Comedy Hour became something else, a memory. It disappeared almost as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving only clips and scattered references behind. Yet for those who watched it, those Sunday nights were unforgettable. You did not just laugh, you roared. You shouted across the room. You felt alive. It was theater, comedy, and chaos wrapped into 1 hour of brilliance. There was a time when the Starlost was supposed to be a game changer. A Canadian-American science fiction epic created by legendary author Harlan Ellison, it promised something rare for television in the early 1970s, a deep, thoughtful exploration of humanity's future. The premise was solid. Earth had been destroyed. The last of humanity lived aboard a gigantic space ark, divided into sealed biospheres, each preserving a different culture. But the execution? That was another story entirely. Everything that could go wrong did. The budget was slashed early in production. Sets were cheap, effects were amateurish, dialogue dragged on endlessly, and characters stumbled through episodes that felt like half-finished thoughts. Ellison was so disillusioned he removed his name from the credits. What was meant to be a rich, compelling universe became a series of dimly lit rooms filled with awkward pacing and empty revelations. Viewers who tuned in expecting the next Star Trek found themselves stranded in a slow-moving dream where nothing ever really happened. Ratings fell, critics turned cold, and by the end of its short run, just 16 episodes, The Starlost had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that big ideas are not enough without the tools to bring them to life. It remains a fascinating failure. It is the kind of show that leaves behind more questions than answers, and perhaps that is why some still seek it out today. Not to enjoy it, but to witness the fall of something that could have been great, a star that never quite made it into orbit. Jeff Cohen gave us one of the most unforgettable performances in 80s cinema, and he did it with a belly, a scream, and a dance. As Chunk in the Goonies, he was the heart of a generation's favorite misfit crew. He was not cool, not slick, not heroic in the classic sense, but he was real, and that made him unforgettable. The Truffle Shuffle became legend, and so did Jeff. But then, nothing. After the Goonies, Jeff Cohen quietly left the screen behind. No chase for bigger roles, no desperate clinging to fame. Instead, he did something few expected. He reinvented himself. While Hollywood was busy trying to fit him into boxes he had already outgrown, Jeff walked away and studied law. He became an entertainment lawyer, not a punchline, not a sidekick, a force. Today, he is behind the scenes, navigating contracts instead of scripts, protecting artists instead of performing as one. And the irony is beautiful. The kid who once had to shout to be heard now helps others speak for themselves. He is powerful, respected, and deeply grounded in the very industry that once tried to define him. His story is not just about transformation. It is about reclaiming identity, about proving that child actors are not frozen in time. They grow, they evolve, and sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is trade the spotlight for something quieter, but just as impactful. Jeff Cohen did not just disappear. He became something more. Cop Rock may be one of the strangest experiments ever aired on network television. Premiering in 1990, it was an audacious fusion of gritty police drama and full-blown Broadway musical. Imagine officers discussing a brutal arrest and then breaking into a choreographed song about the criminal justice system. That was the show. It was created by Stephen Bocco, the mind behind acclaimed dramas like Hill Street Blues and NYPD Blue. And maybe that was the problem. Audiences expected hard-hitting realism, not musical numbers performed in a courtroom. The shift was jarring. Each week, viewers were asked to suspend belief not just for a case, but for a genre. 1 minute, a detective was interrogating a suspect, and the next, a gospel choir was singing about corruption. It wasn't satire. It wasn't camp. It was earnest, and that confused people even more. The show wasn't trying to be funny. It was trying to be groundbreaking. The songs were sometimes moving, often bizarre, and always unexpected. Critics did not know what to make of it. Some called it brave. Others called it a disaster. Most just stared, baffled. Ratings tanked. After 11 episodes, it was gone. But in that brief, bewildering season, something bold happened. Cop Rock tried to do what no show had done before, or has done since. It blurred the lines between storytelling and spectacle, and it refused to apologize for it. Today, it's often mocked, sometimes defended, but rarely forgotten by those who saw it. It was television taking a huge swing, and sure, it missed. But it swung. And in a world of safe formulas and endless reboots, that matters. Marty Feldman was impossible to forget. Those wide eyes, that surreal humor, that presence. Already a star in Britain, Feldman brought his signature style to American television in The Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. It was a sketch show that took absurdity seriously. The pace was fast, the visuals wild, and the tone unapologetically weird. Feldman was the kind of performer who could turn nonsense into poetry, if you were willing to go along for the ride. But American audiences in the early 1970s were not quite ready for it. The show was a whirlwind of bizarre sketches, musical numbers, and animated interludes. One moment he was impersonating a dictator in a tutu, the next he was playing chess with a chicken. It had more in common with Monty Python than with anything on American prime time. And that was the problem. The cultural gap was just a little too wide. Audiences were used to the familiar rhythm of variety shows, not the frenetic chaos of British surrealism. Viewers were confused, advertisers were wary, critics admired Feldman's genius but questioned the format's accessibility. Despite strong backing and an ambitious slate of episodes, the Comedy Machine sputtered out after just one season. Feldman would go on to have success in films, especially with roles like Igor in Young Frankenstein. But this television experiment became more of a cult curiosity than a breakthrough. Today, it is a relic of creative risk, a show that swung for the fences and missed, but missed in a way that still dazzles. Not all brilliance lands. Sometimes it just flashes once and vanishes. Jimmy McNichol was not just a teen idol. He was the teen idol of the late 1970s. He had the hair, the smile, the voice, and the kind of effortless charisma that made girls scream and casting directors scramble. He starred in films, television, and even had a short-lived music career with his sister Christy. But just when it seemed like he was destined to become a permanent fixture in pop culture, Jimmy did something nobody expected. He walked away. By the early 1990s, Jimmy had stepped back from acting completely. Not because the roles stopped coming, not because of scandal, but because he wanted something deeper than fame could offer. He turned to environmental advocacy and real estate, dedicating his life to causes that had nothing to do with cameras or red carpets. It was not a retreat, it was a rebirth. You have to understand what that means. To walk away at the height of popularity, to say no to the world's applause and yes to your own quiet purpose. Jimmy could have tried to stay in the spotlight forever. He could have milked his fame into middle age. Instead, he chose a life rooted in service, sustainability, and simplicity. Today, he lives peacefully, far from the noise of the industry that once adored him. He still speaks occasionally about his past, but never with bitterness, just gratitude. And maybe that is the lesson here, that some disappearances are not a fall. They are a return to solid ground. Sliders was one of those rare science fiction shows that handed its audience the keys to the multiverse and then quietly slipped out the back door. Premiering in 1995, the series followed a group of travelers who slid between parallel universes, each one slightly or wildly different from their own. It was clever, imaginative, and packed with potential. One world would be ruled by technology, another by communism. Some were utopias, most were nightmares. The concept was lightning in a bottle. But television, as always, is complicated. Behind the scenes, the show was plagued by network meddling, cast changes, and creative clashes. What started as thoughtful science fiction turned slowly into formulaic adventure. One of the show's greatest strengths was its premise. What if one decision created a whole new world? That idea alone had enough weight to carry 10 seasons, if not more. But too often, the show's smartest ideas got buried beneath budget cuts and behind-the-scenes drama. It bounced from Fox to the Sci-Fi Channel, and in the process, lost its rhythm. Characters were written off, the tone shifted, and that initial sense of wonder, the thrill of infinite possibilities, got buried under clunky plot lines. Still, for those who watched it, Sliders was unforgettable. The idea that there were versions of our world just a step away lit up the imagination. It made you question the smallest choices. the what-ifs, the roads not taken. And even now, in a media landscape drowning in multiverse stories, Sliders is rarely mentioned. It was a pioneer without a monument, a bold idea that came before audiences were ready and was gone before they could catch up. It was a sitcom with bark, but no bite. Mgherk. A Dog's Life featured actors in full-body dog costumes, playing a family of suburban canines navigating everyday problems like job interviews, neighborhood feuds, and raising puppies. Yes, really. It sounds like a bizarre fever dream, and watching it felt even stranger. The actors, muffled by their rubber dog heads, delivered dialogue through stiff movements and awkward lip-syncing. The humor relied on canine puns and human situations made weirder by the fact that everyone was dressed like a golden retriever. The show's premise was never fully explained. Were these dogs living in a world of humans? Were they symbolic? Satirical? No one knew, and that uncertainty made it nearly impossible for viewers to connect. Audiences were bewildered, critics were harsh, even kids, who were assumed to be the target audience, seemed more confused than entertained. NBC hoped it would be a quirky, family-friendly hit, but Mgherk stumbled out of the gate. The novelty wore off fast. Once you got past the initial shock of talking dogs in business suits, there was not much left. No sharp writing, no emotional core, just a lot of wagging tails and sitcom tropes buried in fur. The show lasted only a handful of episodes before being quietly retired. Few mourned its passing. But in its own strange way, Mgherk has become a cult legend. Proof that in the 1970s, networks were willing to try anything, even a dog suit sitcom. Today, it stands as one of the oddest experiments to ever grace prime time. A surreal reminder that television's strangest ideas sometimes make it all the way to air. Charles Herbert was not just a child actor, he was the child actor of the 1950s. With over 40 feature films and dozens of television appearances before the age of 16, he was a household name at a time when television was still earning its place in the American living room. Audiences adored him. Studios wanted more of him. And like so many before and after, Charles gave the world every bit of himself before he was old enough to realize what that meant. But the applause that lifted him up became the silence that swallowed him. As he grew older, the roles dried up. His voice changed, his face matured, and suddenly the golden boy of the silver screen was just another forgotten teenager. The transition from child star to adult actor is a narrow bridge few can cross, and Charles slipped through the cracks. The phone stopped ringing. The fan letters stopped coming. The boy who had once earned more than his own parents now found himself struggling to survive. He spoke, later in life, with haunting honesty about the pain of growing up in the spotlight, about being used, managed, and then left behind. He battled addiction, faced poverty, and for years, he vanished from the public eye. But unlike many who disappear in silence, Charles eventually came back, not to act, but to tell his story, to warn others. He never blamed the audience. He never lashed out at the industry. He simply revealed the truth, that childhood is not a commodity. And fame, especially when given to a child, is never a gift without cost. Charles Herbert did not just disappear. He faded, slowly, quietly, and with more grace than the world ever gave him. Beauty and the Beast was a fairy tale set in a world of concrete and shadows. From 1987 to 1990, it told the story of Catherine, a lawyer in New York City, and Vincent, a noble beast living beneath the streets in a hidden world. Linda Hamilton brought strength to Catherine, while Ron Perlman, under layers of prosthetics, gave Vincent a quiet, poetic soul. Their love was forbidden, impossible, and entirely real. The show combined crime drama with fantasy, romance with action. It should not have worked, but it did. It spoke to something deep in its audience, a longing for connection in a world that felt increasingly cold. The underground world Vincent lived in was not just a fantasy setting, it was a metaphor for safety, for community, for a different kind of beauty. The show whispered that love could exist without conditions, without judgment, even without surface-level attraction. It did not mock emotion. It embraced it like something sacred. And in doing so, it gave viewers permission to believe in gentleness, even in a brutal world. Beauty and the Beast earned a devoted fan base, one that continues to cherish the show today. But in the mainstream, it has faded. Newer generations barely know it existed, and that is a shame, because for all its melodrama and mythical flourishes, it was sincere. It believed in love without irony. It dared to show vulnerability in a genre that often avoided it. He could vanish with the push of a button. Gemini Man was a science fiction action show with a simple hook. A secret agent gains the ability to become invisible for short bursts of time. It was fast, sleek, and full of potential. But it never clicked. The lead, Ben Murphy, played Agent Sam Casey, a motorcycle-riding, beach-loving secret operative with a wristwatch that turned him transparent. The effects for their time were impressive. The idea had bite, but the scripts did not. Each episode followed the same basic arc. Invisible Man solves the case, reappears in time to deliver a wisecrack, and rides off into the sunset. There was little depth, no character growth, and the concept, while flashy, wore thin quickly. NBC launched the show with fanfare, but audiences were not impressed. The mid-70s were filled with science fiction experiments, and Gemini Man got lost in the noise. Ratings dipped. Critics shrugged, and after 11 episodes, it disappeared just like its protagonist. A few episodes were later re-edited into a television movie, but the series never returned. Invisibility, it turns out, is not much of a superpower when it comes to storytelling. Gemini Man was slick, but shallow. It promised adventure and gave us repetition. Today, it is remembered mostly by collectors and curious fans of retro sci-fi. A show that had all the right gadgets, but none of the spark. Another forgotten ghost of the broadcast era, flickering in and out of memory. Quinn Cummings was never the kind of child star who felt like a product. She was sharp, sincere, self-aware in a way that made her Oscar-nominated performance in The Goodbye Girl feel like more than just acting. It felt like truth. She was the clever kid who said what the adults were too afraid to, but even at her brightest, Quinn was already seeing through the glitter. She left acting before the industry could wear her down, before the roles dried up, before she became someone she did not recognize. Instead, she did something rare. She left on her own terms. Quinn became a writer, an entrepreneur, a commentator. Her essays cut like glass, funny, brutally honest, always thoughtful. She spoke openly about the absurdities of fame, parenting, and growing up in a world obsessed with image. Her exit was not a mystery. It was a declaration that her identity was not tied to box office numbers or red carpets, that she could be more. And she was. She built a second career from intellect and integrity, not nostalgia. In a culture that often devours its young, Quinn Cummings walked away with her voice intact. And maybe that is the most powerful kind of disappearance, the one that becomes a transformation. She is not gone. She is just somewhere better, somewhere real. The Bigalow Theater was one of those brief glimmers in television history that seemed to burn too brightly and too fast. Airing from 1950 to 1951, it lived a strange dual life, first as a CBS anthology drama and later repackaged for Dumont under various names. At its core, it was a stage for stories, real ones, deep ones, sometimes even a little too ambitious for their times. Each episode was a self-contained play, complete with rising tension and dramatic conclusions that tried to stretch the television format beyond its early limits. But here's what sets it apart: the talent it attracted. A young James Dean appeared on it before he became legend. George C. Scott showed up long before anyone called him iconic. For one brief, shining moment, the Bigalow Theater was a springboard for greatness. It was the kind of show that didn't just cast actors, it captured them at the edge of becoming icons. There was a rawness in the performances, a feeling that no one quite knew they were making history. Every episode felt like a rehearsal for something much bigger, but no less sincere. And because of that, it became a quiet archive of American talent right before it exploded. But it never quite caught the public's imagination in the way its network hoped. It lacked flash. It asked its viewers to pay attention, to feel something. That was a lot to ask from a post-war America that just wanted to laugh or sing. And so it faded, quietly, almost politely, into television's attic of forgotten names. But those performances, those early, trembling moments of greatness, they remain buried in dusty kinescopes, just waiting for someone to remember. Sometimes even science fiction needs a laugh, but Quark never quite found its punchline. This short-lived series tried to parody the genre just as Star Wars fever was gripping the world. It followed a garbage collector in space, Adam Quark, and his bizarre crew aboard a sanitation ship cleaning up interstellar waste. There were clones, robots, alien princesses, and lots of fourth-wall-breaking one-liners. The tone was weird, the jokes even weirder. Creator Buck Henry had helped launch Saturday Night Live, and there was hope he could bottle that same absurd genius for network television. But what worked in sketch form did not always translate into 25-minute episodes. Quark constantly wavered between satire and silliness. It poked fun at Star Trek and science fiction cliches, but without much love or warmth for the material it mocked. Some gags were clever, others felt like leftovers. The laugh track made it worse, dulling any potential edge. Critics were puzzled. Audiences were indifferent. NBC shuffled its time slot, hoping something would stick. Nothing did. After just 8 episodes, the show was canceled. But for a brief moment, Quark had aimed for something unique, a space comedy before that was really a thing. And maybe that was the problem. It was ahead of its time, or maybe just off-key. Watching it now, you can see flashes of brilliance under the bad wigs and rubber aliens. But you can also feel the weight of a show that never figured out how to balance satire with storytelling. Quark vanished almost as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind only static in the void. If one of these shows lit up your memory, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with the one you'll never forget.